Okay. All right. So welcome everybody to the Open Referral assembly call. We do these every once in a while. We're going to start doing them a little bit more often this year because we have a lot of activity, which is awesome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to the notes document. We have years of assembly notes in this document. You also see the notes from the most recent conversation. I'm sharing the link in the chat for the new folks. We're taking roll call up top here. So for the new folks who've joined, go ahead and share your information. I've included a bunch of links to like a summary of the Open Referral Initiative, a summary of our approach to partnership development. I also recently published a paper about the resource directory information problem in an academic journal. You can check out that paper. I'll talk a little bit more about it. And I've got these infographics that I encourage you to click on and read through, and I'd welcome your feedback on. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. And I do want to go around and have folks give some quick introductions. Let's keep it brief. As a sneak preview, we'll be hearing at length from Skyler here at Site Savvy about their project, the Connect211 software, and we'll do a little show and tell, maybe up to 30 minutes. And then at the end of the session, I'm hoping that we take 15 or 20 minutes to discuss plans for a longer and more comprehensive convening that we're planning in March, where we might get some stakeholders in the room and we might have some chances to learn and maybe even do some work. And I'd like your input into shaping that agenda from here. So we'll try to take some time at the end of the hour for that. Okay, without further ado, let's go around and get a quick introduction, your name, where you're calling from, what your organizational capacity is, and maybe like a question you might have briefly, or a thing that you're excited about that brought you into this call with regards to Open Referral. But let's keep it, try to keep it mercifully brief. No more than a minute, please. You all probably know me. I'm Greg Bloom. I started and facilitate the Open Referral Initiative. I'm calling from Miami Beach. I'm feeling good. Let's keep it moving. Skyler, we'll hear more from you, but give us a brief intro.
Yeah, Skyler Young, partner and developer at Site Savvy and our sub-project Connect211. And we'll tell you more about that here in a sec.
All right, who goes next? Jump in there.
Julian.
Go ahead, Julian. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. My name is Julian Garcia. I'm calling from St. Louis, Missouri. And we're currently working with the Unity Foundation. And we have been working on some of the back-end components from the Open Referral stuff. So we provided some recommendations on that, but more to come on that.
Yeah, my name is Jeff Brown. Like Julian, I'm also headquartered here in St. Louis, Missouri, the gateway to the West. I'm a technologist, and I'm involved closely in a lot of those activities here at Unity Foundation, and I'm also involved in helping with strategy and general pursuits here. So I'm excited to learn more about what Open Referral has going on and how we can work together. But I don't have any specific questions right now. Thank you very much, and happy Friday to everyone here.
Let's hear from Rob. Oh, go.
So I'll jump in. Sorry. My name's Steve Butzler. I'm the program manager, project lead for ALCO, which is an implementation of a CIE up in Buffalo, New York. We implemented the Open Referral standards as for our service directory, we think. And so I'm interested in understanding more about the mechanics of actually implementing the Open Referral standards, seeing how other people do it in our other projects.
Right on. Thank you, Steve. Rob Redpath.
So yeah, I'm Rob Redpath, part of Open Data Services Co-op, calling you from Nottingham over in the UK. And yeah, my organisation is involved in developing a bunch of different open data standards. And we've been involved in open referral since 2015, it must be. And yeah, we've taken it through the upgrade, done a bunch of work on making the standard hopefully work well. And yeah, always happy to hear from people how they're finding it. Steve, if you've implemented recently, I'd be particularly interested to hear how you found it to work with as a standard, how the docs have been. Greg will tell you a bit about the work we're doing to make those better. So yeah, always happy to hear that kind of stuff.
Great. Thank you. And Ian and Laura calling from Allegheny County.
Yep. Hey, everybody. My name is Ian Lavera. I'm the CTO at Allegheny County Department of Human Services, which is the city of Pittsburgh, to help you put that on the map a little bit better. And we are responsible for a lot of the human services in this area, including homeless, child welfare, aging, intellectual disability, probably missing a few others. But yeah. Great. Laura, you want to do a quick hello? Mute, Laura, mute.
And I'm muted. And yes, I'm Laura, work with Ian. We are down the path of building a new resource site for our community, but looking for more ways to leverage open source resources and see what you guys are all up to.
Terrific. Thank you all for joining us. I appreciate it. Everybody should be at the Open Referral Assembly Minutes document. If you have any trouble accessing this document, let me know. I am going to share some quick updates about the specification development process and some other things. We weren't planning to talk at length about that during this conversation, although there will be an opportunity later to surface the things that you would want to talk about when we have more time. So bear with me as I go quickly. We'll pause for a few questions, but probably breeze through this pretty quick so that we can give the lion's share of the time to Skyler to talk about their work on Connect211. So as I've included in this document, links, if you so choose, to comb through the notes about our specification upgrade process, we are planning a quick development cycle. Not really to build new parts of the specification, but to actually align the US and UK specifications, and through that develop more formal guidance for localization and specialization of the specification for particular communities' purposes. We have very loose guidance. We're about to demonstrate a mechanism for essentially developing what we call a profile, which is like a bundle of extensions and possibly exclusions, so that, for example, in the UK, they can develop address fields that are specific to the UK and have a coherent process of sort of like branching with having a common schema. Through this process, we also think we might be able to revisit the API protocols, the HSDS or the HSD API protocols. We have a current version that is proposed, and I would describe it as normative and speculative and also very large. And the UK has a version that is very small and actually being used. And so we have some interest in, while we're in the process of aligning these specifications and sort of merging them together, we will also look to triangulate the different API specifications and potentially come up with HSDA 2.0. So alignment of the spec is coming first. That's going to be a project taken on by Serapis and Porism, who are both developers on either side of the pond, who've been working with each respective spec and are excited about coming up with a proposal. What I have tasked them with is coming out with something, demonstrating that it works, offering it up to the community as a proposal. The community will be able to offer input into it, and then it will be handed to Open Data Services Co-op in Q2 for sort of verification and formalization. If you have any questions about this, let's find time to chat about it afterwards. You can read through the notes. They will be posting progress about this in the GitHub repo and in the UK discourse and in the US Slack. I will be trying to do my best to make sure that the communication goes through those various channels which have been proliferating and which we do want to consolidate over the course of the next year. You'll have a chance to give input. I don't actually know that many of y'all will have much substantive input on this at this point, but it will be an opportunity potentially to set priorities for more ambitious undertakings to be at some point in the unspecified future. All right, any questions about the plans for specification upgrade and alignment? If you do have questions, actually the best is to leave them in the notes or the chat, and I will get to them as I can. I'm also working with Rob on upgrading our documentation. We are going to be restructuring the current technical documentation on the site, doing some fixes to make the tree easier to navigate. And I am also going to be bringing our old project documentation that describes what is open referral, how do we make decisions, all of which is on many different Google Docs dating back to 2014. I will be converting them into Markdown and loading them into the documentation site. So all the project and product documentation is in the same place. I don't think you really care about this, but if you do, I would love to hear from you. If you have opinions on how to make our documentation easier to navigate, if you have things that you tried to find that you weren't able to find, I do want to hear from you as we go through this process. Okay. Last bit really quickly, and then I'm going to kick it over almost on time to Skyler. As I mentioned before, late last year, a paper that I've been working on for 2 years was published in the Cambridge University Press Handbook on Commons Research Innovations. It's really only 10 pages, but it packs a lot in there about what is the problem that we're working on? Why do we take this approach to trying to solve it? And what do sustainable institutional designs for the production of resource directory information as a public good, what do we think those look like? And so it's a little academic, but if you wanted a 10-page overview of what are the guts of this problem and where do we think things are going, what's driving us, what's the theory behind this practice, that would be a good place to start, is to read this paper. And also, last bit, through my partnership with the workshop on the Commons at Indiana University, we've developed some infographics that try to take these ideas from this pretty boring academic paper and put them in a little cartoon drawing. This is still very much a work in progress. I want your input on it. We've actually reached a state with the infographics where the designer is I'm this is good, this is what I wanted, and the designer is I don't think it's good, I think it's a little confusing. I would like to hear your input on it. So please take a look at the infographics link there and be a user and help me test this. All right. Any other questions? Thank you for bearing with me as I do a quick whirlwind through this housekeeping business. If you do have questions or observations, please leave them in the chat and/or the doc. And with that, I'm going to pass the spotlight over to Skyler. This was one of the more exciting projects that came out of last year. I was delighted to see the work that they put together on our and sort of shared on our blog post. So you can read a lot about what Skyler's about to tell, but Skyler, maybe you'll get into some nitty gritty that we kept out of the blog post. And I hope that this is a good starting point for a conversation. I'll do my best to take notes.
I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, if I may.
Yeah, so I should stop sharing. Great. Okay.
Share screen. Okay. Is that coming through for everybody?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah. Hey guys. So I'm Skyler Young with Connect211. We are a DBA, or doing business as, under SiteSavvy, which is a community and technology web shop in the rural countryside of all places. And today I'm talking about our open resource search engine. I am getting over a chest and nasal infection, so if I seem a little froggy, that's why. But I'm really delighted to be here and talking about this. So we are, a rural web shop, and we are pretty heavily involved in our community. Kind of our purpose is community meets technology. We're part of a Signal Dev meetup, pulling developers from around the country, as it turns out, that are really interested in kind of what we're doing here. We've been getting more involved in open referral, which is really cool. We're currently joining the Information Exchange for Human Services work group to try to help find some standards further along the taxonomic route in the US. And so most of our efforts are focusing towards this work these days. The open resource search engine, and I'm just going to preface this with, please interrupt me and jump in with questions. I'm keeping this pretty succinct and anticipating the Q&A, so either jump in or take notes and then ask questions at the end, and we'll go from there. So the background on this is that the 211 for Washington State, which is a call center organization, came to us in 2018 and said we need a website, which we made. Then they lost their existing resource warehouse and they said we need one of those too. They found a different back end, but they didn't like the front end. So they had us build a search engine, basically. And what we currently have is the third full iteration of that project. It took a while to get that dialed in. It doesn't do data input. It just takes the data from an existing data source. We transform it into HSDS, and then we allow searching of it. So our goal was to build an open source search engine that is really fast and user-friendly and just bolts right on top of an HSDS database. And it could really be used anywhere that the specification is. I can't underscore the fact that it's open source enough. At the moment, word hasn't got out super much, and so we're the only ones contributing. But we would love to have more developers from all over the world who actually use this code and submit pull requests and help us kind of guide the direction of this to be useful to as many people as possible. It is a JavaScript application, so it's a Next.js or React front end, which we find is easiest run on Vercel, super fast. It's a Node.js backend, so we're not using serverless functions, just for those who know. They weren't quite performant enough in this case. We have adopted adapter patterns for flexibility. So, for example, you can really quickly swap between Google Maps and associated APIs or Mapbox and associated APIs right now. And if someone wanted to come in and add one for Leaflet or something like that, that'd be really cool too. And we're trying to keep that pattern in here as much as possible so that, again, core functionality is consistent, the user experience is consistent, but from a developer standpoint, we can make decisions about which APIs we're supporting, you know, and also the cost, right? We started with Google and then discovered they're 6 times more expensive than Mapbox. And so for smaller organizations, Mapbox is the way to go. We use existing solutions architecturally wherever available, as long as they're also open source. So we're not trying to reinvent every wheel. And an example of that is a heavy reliance on the Elk stack from Elasticsearch. So the use case that came to us directly was make this user-friendly for the end user. So we were thinking about, like, one of our personas was a homeless guy, you know, with a smartphone, and he doesn't even know where he's at, right? So we tailored this whole experience for how do we make it super fast for him to find resources, and how does he find resources when he doesn't even know where he is? So he can push the GPS button on our search engine and it just finds his location from the device. And then we do extensive work with the service area data, which I want to talk about later, to make sure that he doesn't need zip codes or addresses or anything to get all of the accurate services for his area. So speed being one of those primary things, we didn't even try to make our own search engine. The national data platform for 211 data is someone we work pretty closely with, and they created their own search APIs. Some of the guys in various HSDS organizations, or the organizations using HSDS, have tried to push a search API. And as soon as we started looking into using one of those or rolling our own, we just said this is not performant enough. We need to use an actual modern search engine stack that's built for scale and speed. And so the crux of this was to just use Elasticsearch for that whole search layer. And it's been a choice that we don't regret at all so far. We've even implemented some highly flexible, dynamic, like advanced filtering and stuff. And it's frankly all just sugar on top. Elasticsearch just does it for us. So no regrets on that so far. Yeah. Just a footnote on that one, we're looking at bringing in some more open source tech as we've done some planning recently. We're currently using Amazon Cognito for logins so that people can make an account and save favorites. And we're not loving Cognito at all. So that's something we'll be getting away from. Probably adapter it before we go so people can use AWS if they want to. But looking at using probably Ori or Curity, both open source solutions that offer a hosted service option. And they're very good. So just FYI, if you're looking for a top-notch open source IAM system, Ori and Curity are pretty awesome. Same goes for switching from, I think we're at MariaDB right now, and we're looking at moving to Postgres, which would also open up the opportunity to use CockroachDB because they use, you know, pretty much the same query language. They both queue off Postgres, and Cockroach offers some really interesting options for enterprise level scalability. So that's an underpinning technology we'd like to make available. And then I will say that at this point, our whole goal has been getting data from another source, bringing it into our database. We'd rather not have to have our own database, but we have to do some data augmentation, as you'll see in a minute. And then and just bolt our search engine on top. But we're actually in talks with nonprofits in Washington State to expand this to a federated resource data exchange, which would be one of the 3 parts of a client information exchange. Per Greg's work, which I extremely endorse, around the idea that a CIE should be understood in 3 parts, right? The resource data, the client data, and then the governance. And we're wholesale adopting that model and pitching it here in Washington State and saying, here's an idea for a open source resource data exchange that keeps multiple parties in sync at the same time. But it is open source and offers transparency to the whole community. So I could talk more about that a lot. I have a whole nother.
Yeah, Skyler, we're gonna have to follow up on that one.
Yeah, we're gonna move on. But the work that I did for that architecting it has heavily influenced our roadmap back to just the basic search engine too. Kind of where that comes in.
It'd be great to hear more about that.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna kind of pause at this juncture before I jump into standards. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're pretty good. And ask if you guys have any questions about the code base or the application itself.
We got a question in the chat here that I'll read for the purposes of video recording. Well, unless Laura, unless you want to jump in and ask yourself directly.
Sure, thanks, Skyler. So this is great to hear about. So one of the things that we're worried about around search is matching our resources to the various search terms that people use. For instance, like someone might search diapers and need to be routed to our family centers, but that's not necessarily a term we would have thought up front. And we anticipate that there will be more examples of that. So just wondering how you think about handling just sort of like ongoing improvement of results based on search terms.
Boy, have you asked the big question. The space, and I can speak to this because I have done exhaustive research on this for 2 months now, and this is why we're joining like ICSIS and stuff. Basically, what you're asking is what taxonomy do we use? It happens that because our work is coming from the 211 space, we use the AIRS taxonomy or the 211 taxonomy, which is exhaustive. It has some 10,000 terms that can be used to categorize things with extreme granularity. And so when you actually use our search engine, what you're looking at here is results coming back that use those taxonomies. So the system is taxonomy agnostic. It'll pick up whatever taxonomy you want to use. The real question is, so your data is stored at rest in HSDS, but then how do you tag it to make it more findable, right, for your end users? I think that's basically what you're asking. The answer is, in our case, we're defaulting to the 211 taxonomy. And you didn't hear it from me, and I swear you did not hear it from me, but there's a little bit of a push to make that an open source taxonomy because it is actually pretty good and it has some 3 decades of work behind it. But everybody that I know of, from hospital networks to state agencies to CBOs, are trying to answer your question. How do we find a common way to describe our data and find resources for all of us? There's at least a dozen work groups in the US that I know of that are working on trying to synthesize a common terminology. From the Gravity Project, ICSIS, to, I mean, I've seen a list of many more that are more localized. So I would recommend getting involved with some of those work groups and seeing what they've come up with. There's also a smaller open source taxonomy that Aunt Bertha originally created. It's called Open Eligibility. And so if you're looking for something just a little smaller and easier to use, that might be a starting point. It hasn't turned out to be robust enough for most of the work that we're doing, but that's an option too.
I'm gonna have to double check this. I feel like this is wacky. I've looked at Aunt Bertha's taxonomy on GitHub, and it looks like it hasn't been updated since 2016. And I think I even poked someone there, and I was like, "Hey,"
Yeah.
and they were like, "No, I think that's right." And I'm like,
I
"Really?"
don't think it's been updated. It hasn't really been updated since 2014, which was when I convinced them to change the license from Creative Commons non-derivative to Creative Commons share alike.
Yeah.
So I got them to change the license so that people could fork it and adapt it. But then they sort of abandoned at least the public facing version. And any changes that have been made since, I think, are really like things that members of the open referral community have contributed. So that said, and I'm happy to talk about open eligibility and taxonomies in general. I want to loop back to Laura's question because I heard something that goes that's looking a little beyond it, or at least on top of it. Skyler, I think you're right that the question of sort of like matching search terms to resources is on one level a taxonomy question. I heard Laura asking a very good question about mechanisms for gathering input for quality improvement, right?
Exactly. It's that process that I'm really interested in. Like, it seems potentially like a space where like maybe ML could like, you know, have some input, and there could be like some place for some like more interesting technology. Again, just around as sites continue to be used and we get data from search bars, to like yours that you're working here, you know, to be able to use then results to improve.
So the answer in our case is again, we're kind of unique. Washington 211 provides paid staff, basically data engineers, to review and curate their data, all data in the database, at least touched once per year, more when it's being frequently updated. So we actually depend on those people. And again, our data is coming from them. So what this system doesn't have is a like dashboard or admin interface to put stuff into HSDS database, you know what I mean? Like, we're pulling it from other data sources and just making it searchable. We're moving into the space of making it something where you can input data. But all the quality control is handled by our partners at this point, the data providers. And they have staff that handle that. And they're really good at it. And I will say a lesson learned while we're working on the federated aspect of this is that machine learning or natural language processing to try to find duplicates and this kind of stuff is really good for giving us signals about the quality of data or whether or not it's duplicates. But when we have localized resources available to put human eyes on it, we get like really unexpected good intel. Like, well, technically that one's open, but they ran out of funding 2 months ago. So we haven't been directing people to that clinic for a while. Like, you know, like we send all our referrals to this other one. So we've actually been developing a weighting system where it's kind of just completely arbitrary, but it's based on real feedback on the number of referrals going to different clinics to say these are the ones that actually have the better staff, the better hours, the better programs or resources or funding or whatever. So we're kind of, I think a hybrid approach of both is actually the best. That's just one of the things that we've learned.
And if I can anticipate where I think Laura's question is going, which sounds awesome to me, is like, are you able to log search terms and results in a way that can become an input for those curators, so that you're able to potentially to like have a method of being like, well, you know, these search terms yielded no results, but we do know that there are, you know, or we want people to check, like, are there actually resources in there that would meet those search terms? And so how do we improve our taxonomy matching? How do we improve our algorithms? Like, it seems like the user input, even from unsuccessful searches, could be valuable inputs to the resource data management process. Is that something you've explored?
100%. So that's all part of the ELK stack automatically. Search terms for any data included with the term are logged in Kibana, and then we analyze it there. And what we're particularly interested in is coverage. So we're looking for what was searched and where was it searched. And the next level is, did they find anything or not? So that's on our roadmap coming up pretty suddenly. But we'd like to do it real time and for data. So in real time, if someone makes a couple searches and gets no results, we're going to pop up and say, look, here's a phone number you can call to just find help from a person, because the last thing we want is for someone to get frustrated and feel like they can't find help. You know, the goal isn't to allow organizations to check the box for I have a search engine. The goal is to actually get people what they need. And then the back cut is we're logging the same data on the back end to find out where we have coverage and where we don't. So that goes in a part of it. But the logging can be customized a lot. So depending on the data and what's being included or not, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for that here.
Laura, thanks for your question. If you want to go deeper, please do leave a comment in the chat or in the doc. I'm going to kick it to Steve. I see your hand up.
Yeah, so so one of the things that it sounded like you're focusing on the search and optimizing the search or improving the search is within the search, if they find matches, maybe start to improve the search that way or improve the search results that way. Is there?
Yeah.
And wait, sorry, the next level maybe is whenever that individual gets, I guess, leaves your search and goes to that agency. Is there any move to providing input of whether they actually did find the help they needed, input, or is the rest of that loop outside of you all the way back to the agency, back to 211?
Yeah, so in my view, that has to be, this is how we've said it so far. In my view, that has to be actually not part of the system, because as soon as we know that an identifiable person went to a specific clinic, it's PHI. And it cuts against our mission to make this public data and really not worry about the security aspect too much. So the other pillar of a CIE would be the client data. And a CIE needs to have something like this, where you can say through APIs or through an interface or whatever, I can go find what I need, but then I'm really taking that ID anonymously. And then I'm tracking the patient's life cycle in the client data exchange, right? Because that one is going to need unbelievable amounts of consent, security, et cetera.
Yeah. I will say that I think that makes sense to me, just to put my editorial hat on, that you'd want to keep, like, if you're developing a public website, you know, it may be okay to be like, this is just for information. We are not trying to collect personal information, because that is another level of complexity. That said, yeah, Skyler, you do want to keep in mind, especially in like rural areas, a search term and a zip code can add up to PHI.
True.
Right. If you have a zip code and it's like a single, you know, services for single mothers, you know, of this kind of ethnicity, like there might only be 2 or 3 single mothers of that kind of ethnicity in that zip code. It, like, you do have to consider the potential of edge cases in the search data itself. Just wanted to flag that for you.
It's possible. We haven't seen a lot of people held to that standard.
Yeah.
We're anonymizing all of our logging data, obviously, for that reason.
Yeah.
So there's no personally identifiable information, not even like, you know, IP addresses and stuff with the logs that we take.
Yeah.
So that helps.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're correct.
And I want to loop back to Steve's first question about, Steve, you had a question about like improving search results within the search process, maybe making suggestions, offering potential filters. Skyler, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so from our perspective, that really comes down to the data. So, and this is the reality of the space we're working in. These 211 organizations seem, based on feedback that we're getting, to ostensibly have the best resource data sets, but even at that, it's not that great from like a developer standpoint. It doesn't have consistent facets, eligibilities. There certainly are no eligibility standards that are being used between them. So that's where we actually kind of adopted some of Elasticsearch's strengths and said, look, you just tell us which fields you're using as eligibilities. Like, it can be anything, and we're going to pipe that into the index and turn those into something that we can search on over here. So the system just kind of like slurps up whatever's available to narrow this data down based on what they provided to us. But we've been working kind of exhaustively with all of them to say, look, we got to corral this whole space towards some standards. First, we got to get you on HSDS so you have data at rest in the standard. And then secondly, we got to start developing standards around, one, data normalization. I'm actually moving on to my slide here, I think. This is like my next thing. We need data normalization. So, use the ITUT's specifications for contact information and conform to that. And then we need standardization around the taxonomy, so how people find the data, because that, for at least in the use cases we've been working with, like that's been the main vector for whether or not the data is a quality result. It's a combination of, did I find the right taxonomy? Did it make sense? And theirs has been pretty good so far, pretty user-friendly for people to identify. I'm looking for a food pantry, something basic, or I need rental assistance. And then the second vector is, and this is the hard one, if I call this phone number, is someone going to answer, and can they help me? Is this data current? Is it up to date? That's actually been the one that hits us the most, is like the data is out of date. And this is particularly true with COVID going on. Like a ton of stuff is gone now. And it just takes people on the ground getting that feedback of like, it's not working. So I love Laura's idea of like allowing some feedback from the space of like, hey, I called this number, but this resource didn't work, or they're closed now, kind of like Google does. And we could do that if we do get the contract and move on to a resource data exchange. But right now, we're a one-way data sync from the source. And we explicitly didn't create a two-way data sync because that creates a whole host of additional complexities. So we can't get that data back to the 211s, for example. That's kind of where our hands are tied. Would I like to do that? Oh man, 100% yes, 100% yes. And I will say that we've adopted a microservices architecture on all of this. So I think that the ability to create, for example, a dashboard to put data in or manage this like a CRM as a standalone app that connects to the same database, I think there's a ton of potential there. And this could become an ecosystem of open source solutions that all operate off of the HSDS standard.
Okay. I do want to start wrapping up Skyler's presentation. This is super fascinating, and I think there are angles that we could continue to dig into. I want to give you if there are any other questions, I'm answering Steve in the chat a little bit. If there are any other questions, I want to note them, even though we might not dig into them. Skyler, I encourage you to like make a pitch for, first of all, like what should people think about if they want to use this or they want to test this out? What do you encourage them to do? What's your vision, or your hope or your questions for a potential, network of developers who might contribute to this project? Sure.
I'll do that, and then I'll tee up the questions too with a couple observations that I'm pulling from us in the MVP about the API specifications. So we're a small web shop. We offer this as a service. We're actually adopting Greg's advice. Thank you, Greg. We did, saying that the value should not come from having the data. The value should come from services on top. And so that's us. If you are or know someone who wants to have their data searchable in what we think is one of the more cutting edge ways using a standard, then we can be hired to do that. Also, if you're a developer who's working on a project and needs a searchable front end, we would really love to work with you because we want to start building a developer community around this. I mean, in my opinion, it's not really open source unless more than one person is using it. So we want developers just to use this and implement it. And we'd like to be challenged and have this moved in directions we didn't think of. Our use case is really tailored for 211s right now, but we'd like to open this up and say any small CBO could come in and use the system, which would include something like building a dashboard admin or something. So yeah, connect211.com, and you can connect with us there. My contact info will be at the end of this presentation as well. And I'd love to talk honestly with anyone who just has some questions or wants to flesh this out a little further. With that said, I'd love to kick off the Q&As with just a couple of observations here around the APIs. We are not using APIs HSD at all. We did in our second iteration, and it was basically useless. So we just ditched it with the second one. We didn't need a search API, right? Because we're using a search engine for that. And all of the ones that we tried that existed, like from the National Data Platform, were too slow. I will say that the central hub of kind of like the burgeoning central hub of all 211 data is called the National 211 Data Platform. They actually adopted HSDS kind of like 99% of the way there. They made a few adjustments for their own purposes. But they have a lot of use cases of this in the real world now. And between the two of us and all the 2-in-1s we worked with, we noticed two patterns that I want to share that really came up a lot. One is service allocation is kind of one of the most granular packets of data that we just needed all the time for a practical search interface. So we actually synthesize a record that collates all the service data with all the location data, right? And then normalizes all the permutations of those. And that's what gets spit into the search engine to be searched. And that can handle a service that doesn't have a location. But that's kind of the thing. And NDP ended up doing the same. We developed this in parallel separately. So when we compared notes, we were just like, I guess this is one of those things that really comes up as kind of like something that's useful for developers. The second thing that's come up and that we both kind of, again, came to a conclusion about independently and discovered when we compared notes was it's useful to actually search for agencies and then get all of the services and locations or services applications or whatever, all those resources for that agency. And that's been a really common use case for the search engine even that we're working on building right now. And if Rob, I think you noticed that bulk import export API schema that was shared from the NDP, it's in that format, right? It's all agencies and then all of their services and locations nested under them. But using the basic schema and naming conventions of HSDS. So those were two kind of lessons that we've learned. And then the last thing I'll say is it's not specific to HSDS, but I would love to see some standards formed around what is a service area. In our experience, we have to be able to do math on that. So strings are out and there's no standard for strings anyway. So we've actually been transforming them all into GeoJSON. And that's one way to do it. But I think it's useful to have a plain text description of service areas, but then there has to be a surveyor level data component that just tells you what the actual shape of that is. It's just my opinion.
Yeah, and Skyler, I think there is a long thread about this with a lot of opinions. I think I might have pointed you to it. I don't think we got resolution. It's one of the few things in all this time that like there seem to be different and not readily reconcilable opinions on how to handle this.
Oh, cool. I gotta go jump in.
Yeah, so I'll point you to that thread if you haven't seen it. Yeah, like people want shape files, but like it does seem like this is one thing that varies across geography pretty greatly. Like the needs in Canada were not readily reconcilable with the needs here in the US. So, but maybe there is a way to start prioritizing this for future development. I do want, so this is actually helpful. This actually gets us started on the final exercise, the final thing I'd like us to do today. So I'm going to bring some of those forward as good examples. Or Skyler, if you can look down to the bullets and start adding those things in the bullets. I am planning to organize like a longer assembly or workshop that I'm thinking something in the range of like 3 to 4 hours a day for at least 2 days. So this is the kind of thing that in, a few years ago, we would have tried to get together in person and have a couple of full days. That's still not going to happen, but I think that's okay. I'm not trying to have everybody on Zoom for a whole day, but we do want more than just an hour. And so I'm looking at maybe a Thursday and a Friday, or maybe several weeks of a Friday of about a half day where we can get together and explore these ideas, learn from each other at a greater length, and maybe even start banging out some, proposals or, doing some work. I'm thinking the kind of thing that would have both this very technical crowd and also some of our stakeholders from some of the pilot projects who just do the work of resource directory information management. We might want to have everybody together, opportunities to learn from people, and then maybe opportunities to break apart and dig into the specifics. I have put together a list of blank bullets. Scroll down this list of blank bullets on this document. I might share the screen again if it's all right. Oh, Skyler, it's on your screen. So this is starting on page 5. If you all would take a few minutes, what I'd like you to do is give us 3 to 7 suggestions, 1 per bullet. Pick your own, part of this. Please give people space. What we want is every bullet ideally would have a verb. give us a specific action of something. And we also encourage adjectives. So, for example, improving the project documentation so our process is clear. We've got, exploring potential solutions for service area as a standardizable element. Let's take a couple of minutes. If everybody could go in, if you were given 3 to 9 hours to explore with folks like this, what are the kinds of things you'd want to work on in dialogue? Give us a bunch. What we're going to do is let each of you generate a few, and then we're going to go through and see if we can dedupe them or cluster them. And then we'll quickly get a sense of where the heat is, what people really want to work on. Everybody following along? You have access to the document. I see 3 people adding notes. Okay, and I'm going to share my screen, get this back on here. Bulk import export API. Okay. Should search specs really be a part of the HSDS? Yeah, that's a good question, because we started developing them and we realized we didn't have enough opinions. And you're suggesting maybe we don't need those opinions, or maybe there's a very small number of opinions that we need to have.
Hey, I mean, my experience has been, I've tried 3 of them, I think, and they were all vastly inferior to the results we got by just using a search service.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, why try?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to give this 2 more minutes, and then we're going to spend about 5 minutes clustering these and then quickly, indicating where, which ones you'd want to work on once we've seen the whole list. But please do, let's get some more in here. I'm seeing a few. I'm going to write down some things that I want. All right.
How to convert iCarol. You know who knows is the NDP. We're actually pulling data from iCarol. I don't know who said that, but.
And by the way, iCarol has an HSDS export. They might not tell you about it, but it exists, right?
Quote unquote.
Okay, all right. I'm seeing quote unquotes. We're going to want to get some specific.
Service Point has an HSDS exporter as well.
They've told me they don't do bulk export, but that they could. They told me you could just query the whole database from the API and get a JSON output, and then you
can.
Yeah.
Can.
All right.
It's.
So I'm going to add on here. I'm actually going to add on here monitoring and evaluating vendor adoption.
Ooh, yeah.
Okay, so let's take a few minutes just to anybody else still typing? I see one person still typing. That's okay. But if we don't have multiple people still typing, I might remove some bullets and see if we can. Now, what I'd like you to go through, and we can do, like, this might get a little chaotic. Please be mindful of other people's cursors. But let's see if we can go through it, read the list. And if you see dupes, or if you see at least things that are related to each other, go ahead and grab one bullet and put it next to another. And let's see if we can let's see if we can cluster through this list really quickly. Everybody understand my suggestions?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to move this service point iCarol. There we go.
Ooh, assessing the method of spec extension or profiling to preserve interoperability. Rob, did you put that in? Because if not, like, I know that you guys in the UK had some great work on profiling. It was pretty cool.
No, I'm excited for that. That wasn't me. It's nice that I'm not the only one that cares about this stuff.
Yeah.
That was
great.
me. It's just that's me. I'm just putting down what's on my to-do list. Okay, search. Yeah. Yeah, data quality. What does good mean? Great. Yeah, infrastructure considerations. I'm going to put this up with the utility. Okay. So any other ideas out there? Please put them in. But let's go ahead and great. Yep. Let's go ahead. So what I'd like you to do, here's my final instructions, and then we'll wrap up. Go through here and vote for 3 things, 3 to 5 things, but not your own. And vote, but just put a little plus mark next to something that is a priority for you. Don't put a plus mark next to something you've already written. Although if you see something similar to something you've already written, you can put a plus mark for that. Give yourself up to 5 plus marks. And let's go ahead and see if there are, a set of clear priorities here. Okay. This is great. I'm getting some heat on the validator and the mapping and integration. Yep. And can somebody, the person who wrote the build an open source utility to contain the resource data, is that like, you mean like a content management system?
Hey, Greg, yeah, that was me. Yeah, I mean, basically, I mean, it's something like Airtable, right? Where Airtable is very accessible and easy to like update this information. But like Skyler said, like the hardest thing in this space is maintaining that data.
Yep.
And it feels like, yeah.
Okay. I want to build that so bad.
One note, Devin Balkand was not able to join us this time, but Devin's group Serapis has a content management system called OR Services, where they're developing some verification systems. I'm planning to do another one of these spotlights next month with Devin, so he can talk through, just like Skyler talked about the front end, Devin can talk through the work he's been doing on the back end, and we can have a similar instance. This conversation and that one hopefully will set the agenda further for the convening in March. I think Devin would be very interested, like Skyler, in having more folks, contributing to OR services. He's even said to me, I don't think it's unfair to say, like, at this point, it's like 4 or 5 years old. There's a lot of technical debt. He might be ready to rebuild it. I do wonder whether Skyler's work and Devin's might be alignable. So he might have
talking about it. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing to note is I think probably a month from now, that would be, well, I won't do the scheduling now, but I think probably a month from now, maybe at the same day and time, we will reconvene and potentially spotlight Devin. I'm planning for the workshop. I'm planning between the second Sunday and the last Sunday. There's a period when the UK's daylight savings time puts them an hour closer to us than normal. And so we are going to try to organize this workshop in that window when we are both an hour closer. So it makes it that much easier for 11 a.m. Or 8 a.m. Pacific and 4 p.m. London time to work together. If you're interested in helping design and facilitate that, like I said, I'm expecting a group of developers. I'm expecting a group of stakeholders. We might invite some like policymakers and decision makers, to just like learn about the process. If you have a specific interest, this is all really helpful. I'm seeing some key themes. I will be processing this data into our agenda. I'll be following up with each of you. If you have any questions, please let me know. If you want to get involved, please let me know. Any final questions or suggestions? We have 1 minute left. I appreciate your time. I hope this was worthwhile. I'd welcome your suggestions on like making these check-ins even more helpful. Unity Foundation folks, thanks again for joining. I know you've generated some great input. It seems like people are interested in talking about the kind of work that you were looking into on the validator and transformer. So at the very least, I'm going to be creating space on the agenda for that in March, for that specifically to do a deep dive. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Greg. Everyone have a great weekend.
great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, all. It was nice to meet you.
All right.
See
Take
you
care.
later.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye. Appreciate it, Skyler.
Yeah, no worries.
So I think when I end, then it starts converting the video.
Yeah.
Okay.